Bernie, what led to the formation of the Healthspan Action Coalition? Take us back to that moment.
Well, that's a really loaded question because, as you know, I was a practicing attorney in Miami for many years, having my own practice, and I had become involved in 2003 with the stem cell scientists of the world. I filed a notable case that debunked the claim of human cloning. It's a story in and of itself. It's well known, so I don't need to share it on this podcast. But the point is that my life changed at that point because I had acquired knowledge about stem cell research, the political battles that were ahead to move that field forward, and the laws being passed in different jurisdictions, and even a proposed world treaty in the United Nations that would have condemned not only unethical human reproductive cloning, but something called SCNT, which is somatic cell nuclear transfer, therapeutic cloning of stem cells. Well, I was invited at the earliest meeting of the International Society for Stem Cell Research. And as the lawyer and patient advocate in the room, I created a nonprofit organization, the Genetics Policy Institute, later known as the Regenerative Medicine Foundation, and assembled probably the greatest scientific advisory board in the history of cell therapies, if not all of biology, of the leading scientists of the day. We challenged what happened in what was happening in the United Nations. We led a global movement and brought in patient advocacy, the world and patients to the United Nations. I got to know Christopher Reeve 6 months before he passed away. I was in his house, and we taped a message to the United Nations. And in the legal committee of the UN, we derailed a global treaty that would have condemned part of stem cell research. By a single vote, and we flooded the fax machines of the UN, spewing fax paper all over the floors of each mission in the UN. So at that point, I realized that this was much more interesting and important than suing people for a living, right? So as a lawyer, I devoted for the past 22 or so years myself first to create something called the Genetics Policy Institute, now known as the Regenerative Medicine Foundation, and created and conceptualized a lot of meetings, including global meetings called the World Stem Cell Summit. The core of that was bringing in the patients, the people that could benefit from stem cell research, with the scientists, with the lawmakers, with the emerging industry for regenerative medicine. And it caught on. And the result was the creation of more than just a global movement, but a consumer movement. A consumer movement means individuals, for themselves, for their loved ones, saw stem cells as a salvation technology for their health and their health of their loved ones and families. And when you are able to harness that kind of energy and the organizations behind it and the individuals, you can do amazing things, such as Melissa and the teams that worked on Prop 14 and Prop 71. $15 billion of California taxpayer money for a mini NIH in California that's been able to fund basic research that otherwise might have not been accomplished and build the institutions. So that was not the activity of thousands of people. It became the activity of thousands of people and millions of people that signed up on ballot initiatives. But it was a core advocacy group of patient advocates, Bob Klein and his family as the leader, a father with a diabetic child and a bond expert and a brilliant legal mind who conceived of this project with others. And the people such as Melissa that handled field operations of Prop 14 during the COVID years, acquiring millions of signatures, but also was the first executive director of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, hiring the first 10 people there and guiding the board through like something like 1,500 hours of meetings. Well, when you look at and break it down and understand these are people narratives, the technology has advanced, but so has the technologies uh, uh, converging: AI, microscopy, tissue engineering, all biomaterials. All of this in the past 20 years are now front and center. And now, finally, the regulatory system and the reimbursement system is gearing up so we will overcome the regulatory hurdles. So it's taken this long for this new pillar of medicine, cell therapies, to come to pass. Well, the thing is, it's happening at the same time as the longevity movement has come into play. And we can see how the funding for stem cells, regenerative medicine, uh, and a host of other technologies is being funded for folks looking at aging, people looking at longevity. Harnessing that energy of where the field is going, not where it's been in the past, we felt, Melissa and I, that it was time for a global movement to harness this so it would fit the broadest population. So using the skill sets as an attorney throughout and becoming a policy expert, more or less, or being able to convene policy experts, gave me the ability to be, as a non-scientist, to help advance the field. And this is the idea of what the stem cell movement was, but now it's emerged full scale to a global movement for a healthy lifespan using all of these technologies. So that's sort of the background of where we are today.
Excellent, excellent. I mean, you sort of already answered my next question, which I'm going to pose to Melissa. Melissa, maybe you can tighten this up a little bit, but you know, this is happening. This has happened over the last 20 years. This is a long time. A lot of this stuff to been happening, and a lot of people are finding out by now. But it always begs the question, right? Why now? I mean, Bernie mentioned the confluence of factors that are all coming together to at this moment in time. But can you elaborate on why now?
Yes, absolutely. And as often happens when I listen to Bernie speak, I get inspired and I have actually things to say to build on what Bernie said. And first of all, the convergence of different types of technology, as Bernie said, that's absolutely happening with AI and just just data science in general to use for medical research. It's not new. And by the way, if we really think about it, this notion of longevity and wanting to live longer also isn't new. I mean, the Greeks and the Romans wanted to do it too, and the Egyptians, and Ponce de Leon was searching for it, right? I mean, it's not really new. And guess what? Neither is longevity science. It's just now reached the point where more of the public is paying attention to it. And that's happening more on the lifestyle side than on the deep science side. But the other convergence that's happening, and this is where Bernie and I really come into play here, is these two fields, regenerative medicine and longevity, or geroscience, whatever you want to call it. They were not calling it Healthspan science when they were in their labs at MIT and USC and Stanford already, and UT Austin already working on longevity science. They also didn't think of themselves as people working in regenerative medicine, but those two fields that were working in parallel have absolutely converged at this point. So when I met Bernie, some of what he was describing about his early days, being the de facto lawyer for the International Society for Stem Cell Research in the earlier days of stem cell science. You know, the embryonic stem cells were first isolated in the late 90s. So by the early 2000s, when Bernie started working in the field, and then when I did in 2003-4, working on that first initiative to create our agency in California, it was a relatively new field. And so, of course, one of the first things we had to do when CIRM was created, our state agency here, we opened the doors. As Bernie said, I hired the first 10 people. we gradually hired a science team, and we needed to get grants out the door to train scientists, people already that had said, raised their hand and said, I'm going to be a biologist, I'm going to do biomedical research, but I don't know how to use stem cells in a lab. We had to train them to do it. Well, the same way that over the past 20 years, the stem cell field and regenerative medicine in general have exploded in terms of how much it has grown. You've seen that in science as well. I go and give talks at schools around California to early career scientists about policy and patient advocacy and public information around science and how those converge and are interrelated or important to each other. And there are so many students now that just say, oh, I am a stem cell scientist. You didn't hear that in 2004 that often. There were people doing it. Same thing with longevity. There are some people that have been focused on longevity and geroscience for decades. And now there are departments called that at places like UCSF, where I live, Stanford, USC. I'm thinking of all the California institutions, but certainly on the East Coast and in the Southwest as well, up in the North, in the Midwest. There are departments, there are people focusing on this, and there are people being inspired to go into this field. But another thing is also true, and this is the why now, really the answer to the why now. The longevity field, even though it's converging with regenerative medicine, people are not as familiar with it as stem cells. Stem cells, in some ways, have become a commodity, which may be a bad thing, but that's not what this podcast is about. We can talk about that another time. But with longevity, it is catching people's attention, but the science needs to be protected. It needs to be funded, and it needs some non-dilutive sources of capital. Then there are the dilutive sources that are going to come around, and that's good. We need industry to move things through the whole pipeline and get products out to people and available to bring globally once they start to exist, these interventions that some of the scientists have been working on for decades. Another thing that's happening, and this is why it's important for people like us to be involved, is that among the scientists in the longevity community, even just among the scientists, let alone the others that surround them now, people that are investing, wanting to work at companies, or are just interested in it for their own health span. I'll call it health span. There's debate about whether funding should go any longer to individual diseases. Should we fund research into Parkinson's or research into ALS? And there's some unrest about where some of the federal funding has been going. Maybe a lot of it's been going just to Alzheimer's, right? And so then you can talk about maybe we need to take a look at the way these federal agencies deal with interventions like the ones that are being developed. But then there are the people that will say it doesn't matter what the source of money is. If somebody's doing research into Parkinson's, maybe they don't cure Parkinson's, but maybe they discover something that's good for longevity generally. If you fund people that say, I want to focus just on longevity, living longer, they might find a cure for ALS. We don't know. We don't know where the science will come from that helps with anything, any of these things that are the goal. So the reason for
Melissa,
go ahead, Bernie.
to that point, I'm sorry to interrupt, and Junaid, the key is that the whole notion of the scientific endeavor is so important, and freedom for scientific research. And to the extent that it's curtailed or I don't think funding for basic research is misspent, because we don't know where the discoveries are going to come from. You don't have to just focus on longevity science or stem cells or C. elegans, a worm, or a naked mole rat. It's all valuable because we're going to be able to utilize that, and there will be eureka moments.
Yes.
And now in an era with machine learning, these things are going to be accelerated in an incredible way. So, while we certainly support the National Institute of Aging and the NIH and the science and the funding, but every aspect of science and the whole biomedical realm holds importance right now. And everything is now open and communicated around the world. Arguably, that's the optimistic and thrilling spot that we're at now. And that's why we've been able to grow our consortia, our coalition, to close to 250 organizations.
And I just
Well,
want
you
to
know what?
add, I totally agree with what Bernie just said, and it's actually really exciting to be part of the longevity health span geroscience field because for the most part, it's a group of scientists and people that support their work that are interested in it being open source, information being available. Nobody's, hiding away in their lab trying to be the one to get the Lasker and then the Nobel, or maybe they are, but they're more open about it. Maybe that's a general shift in science, but it definitely is part of the longevity field to share information. And I hope that continues. I hope it gets funded at the levels it needs to get funded, and I hope that spirit continues.
Well, listen, cheers to eureka moments, right? But the thing is, to have eureka moments, you have to do something, right? And that's the main thing. We're doing something, not just to do it, because we're trying to push forward. But it's out of that, the serendipity, that you get these eureka moments. And what's going on here is allowing that to happen. So I want to have a couple of thoughts just to wrap this up. This part of the conversation up is that Healthspan, it's about investment, regulation, and public engagement, right? That's where HSAC comes in and why I think it's relevant, timely, and critical. Now, if we want breakthroughs to reach the public, we need an ecosystem that supports innovation, like funding, policy, and education. They all play a role in this. Everyone can have a role in this movement. So with that said, let's move on to the next.